All right, we're now live. Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us. We'll get started in just a minute. I see that the delegates are getting in right now, so I'll just give it a couple of minutes before we get started. Okay, I think we can get started. Hello, everyone. Welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is going to be an hour-long keynote session with 30 minutes for this speech, followed by a Q&A session. If you have any questions, please send them only to the Q&A box on Zoom. And delegates, I'd like to request you to please keep your mics muted during the entire session. So I'm Hashmitha. I'm a member of the programming team, and I will be the moderator for today's session. It's my pleasure to present the first keynote for SpaceGen United. I'd like to welcome our keynote speaker, Paul Anderson. Thank you so much for joining us and taking the time out of your weekend to do this. And thank you to Lockheed Martin. Paul has over 34 years of experience at Lockheed Martin and is currently the Human Lander System Program Director. His recent assignments included serving as the Artemis Mission 2 Director, the Service Module Integrated Product Team Director, and the Avionics IPT Director for the Orion Program. Paul also has significant previous program management leadership experience on programs including GOES-R, Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter, and Mars Exploration Rover. He is Lockheed's executive to the Colorado School of Mines, where he serves on the College of Engineering and Computational Sciences Advisory Board, as well as the chairman of the Aerospace Industry Advisory Council. He's an associate fellow of AIAA and recently served as the Rocky Mountains section chairman. Paul, the floor is yours now for the keynote whenever you're ready. Thank you again.
Okay. Well, thank you so much. And Ashmita, thank you for the introduction. I'd like to thank everybody. I guess, I don't know whether it's morning, noon, afternoon, or evening. It's that for all of us, I guess, on this. Folks are literally across the globe, and it's an honor for me to do this. I think that just actual theme, the fact that we're really, we have folks literally across the globe is gonna fit well into what I'm gonna discuss today. And I'd really like to thank the Space Generation Advisory Council and Space Generation United for inviting me and for having Lockheed Martin as part of this year's conference. Really, the focus of my talk today, it's probably just as much personal as it is professional in the space business and all of that. I'm really hoping that you're going to take away, for you as individuals, something from this, as you or just early starting in your careers, or perhaps you're still in college and trying to think about exactly what you want to do in your professional career. I hope you're able to take something away, and I also hope you learn a little bit about space exploration and some of the journeys that I'm going to share that I have been on previously, where we're going, most recently with the Artemis program. I'm going to go over some of that today, but I want to try to keep this as informal as I can. A few things I do want you to take away specifically is really your career and your life, or their journeys of exploration, very much like what we do in space. Space is all about exploring. We as a species have that in our DNA. And all of you have that in your DNA, whether your career, your personal, all of this. I want you to take away that they are going to be journeys. They are not, hey, I've got a plan, I'm going to lay this out for the next 30 or 40 years. They're going to be journeys. The next point I want you to take away is really from a space exploration perspective. I'll just say now is the time. There's really never been a time in the history of mankind where this journey is more doable and really more critical for the planet than it is right now. It's both for all nations, really for the entire world. It is not going to be for the future. It's not going to be for the next generation. It's going to be for you. And so now is the time for all of us to really embrace deep space exploration and where that's going to take the planet. And again, it's up to us. It is not just one of us. It is not one nation. It is not my generation. It is not the previous one. It is up to all of us to make this happen. And again, when you kind of we'll go through some of the charts and experiences that I've had, I think you're going to begin to get a feel, and really part of the talk I'm going to be doing is how space exploration is a team sport. It is not about one company. It's not about one country. It's not just about ESA or NASA. It is about the entire world getting together. And so I've always said this is the ultimate team sport. I hope you take that to heart, and kind of as I go through my background and then talk some about some of the specifics I've done in my career, I'm hoping you guys get the feel for that. So again, thanks for having me, and I really hope you enjoy this. I hope you enjoy this talk and are able to take away a few personal things from this. Just to give you a little bit of my personal background, I hate to tell you how many years I've been doing this. It's been 34 and a half years since I graduated from college. I'm going to give you sort of my background, just going way, way back, and how I ended up where I'm at today. And you're going to see some of the journey and some of the charts that I show as well, some of the projects that I've worked. But I really want to talk personally about sort of how I got here. I was obviously born in the United States. I was actually a Midwest kid. I was born in Ames, Iowa. I don't know if there's any Iowa State people here, but I was not born into a, quote, space family. I know a lot of you probably have parents and uncles and cousins and everything else that were in the space business. As far as I know, I am the very first. My brother and I are both in the space business. My dad was actually, my family is a sports family. In fact, when I grew up in Iowa, my dad was the head basketball coach at the university there at Iowa State University. So he was a big sports figure. In fact, we grew up as kids. I played basketball all the way through college. I played golf. I literally played every imaginable sport. And, as far as space is concerned, I really wasn't introduced to it. But I did have a couple of experiences. And I think what's really interesting, you guys are really close to getting this perfect. Today is actually July 19th. But July 20th, which is tomorrow, of course, happens to be the 51st anniversary of Apollo 11. And that, as I recall, it is probably my very, very first recollection of the space world. And I was pretty young. I hate to tell you how old I was, but I do remember when Neil Armstrong stepped foot on the moon back in 1969. I was all of 7 years old, or almost 7. And it was just something that I remember, not maybe so much from oh gosh, I remember the details of what the landing was and this, but I just recall everything in the world stopped. My parents, who, they weren't that interested in space and that sort of thing, but every single person in the entire neighborhood stopped what they were doing. We all went over to some neighbor's house. They had the biggest black and white TV of anybody in the neighborhood. And we all gathered around. And I just remember, this was really odd. I had never experienced where, a whole neighborhood got together to watch one event. And it's like, well, what is going on? And it's like, well, this is the first time in the history of the world, in the history of mankind, that somebody has stepped foot on another heavenly body, on the moon. And I just recall as a small child being just amazed by that. Like, how is this possible? And not so much just experiencing that, but seeing how my relatives and parents and friends, the older folks, they were all crying when it happened. And I didn't understand why my dad would be crying because somebody landed on the moon, but it was that emotional. And it was, as we look back now and I'm older and I can reflect on it, it was one of the few events really, even in my lifetime, that is, I'll just say, stopped the world. There have been other events that I would say are less, less positive, but that had a really big influence on me. I was like, how could something occur that is this big that really transformed the entire world? And so I remember that. Again, I was a small child, and it just happened tomorrow to be the 51st anniversary of that. And again, that was really my first recollection of anything having to do with space. And really my next recollection, after, I was a child in Iowa. We moved to Colorado when I was 9 years old. But I remember another event. And again, coincidentally, it was on the exact same date, on July 20th. It's a really special date, I guess. And the fact that I'm speaking on the 19th, I'm glad I'm not on the 20th, because I don't think I'm that special. But the Viking Landing, and I don't think even any of you on the call were born during the Viking Landing. And this was another one. Now I was 13 years old. And this one, of course, now we had color TV. And so this was another one of these events where, everybody kind of stopped what they were doing across the world. And it's like, do you know that we are landing a lander on Mars? And it's like, well, how could we possibly do that? But again, on July 20th, 1976, it was just after the 200th anniversary, the bicentennial of the United States. I remember everything about 1976 because everything was red, white, and blue. And we had these really, geeky shirts that we wore, and everybody was, very, very much into the bicentennial. And just right after that, here it was, we landed a lander on Mars. And so I started kind of connecting the dots, like, well, let me see, we landed people on the moon, and that was in 1969, and now we landed this big this big lander on Mars just 7 years later. I am thinking in my head, oh my gosh, the next step is going to be landing humans on Mars. It's got to be happening, certainly in my lifetime. And so my excitement started getting, just, amazing. My inquiry, just everything about it started, again, got more and more interested in it. Now, frankly, I was not one of these kids who, because of these events was like, I want to be an astronaut. I want to do this. I kind of described, I was always really into sports. I'm My mother said I am the most competitive person God ever put on the earth. Everything is a competition, whether it's a game of Monopoly or whether it's who wins the local soccer game, the Broncos are winning. I'm a very, very competitive person. And what I sort of started shaping as I was going through, my schooling years, my high school, and then as I went into college is, wow, I love team sports. I love it more than just about anything else. Yet I love the excitement and challenge of what I saw in the space industry. And so, kind of a long story short, I ended up going into college, and I really went into engineering for two reasons. Number one is the school that recruited me to play basketball was only an engineering school. But the other reason was engineering is hard, and science, math, engineering, and technology is hard. And so the competitive part of me was, I'm not going to take any easy major. I'm going to take the absolute hardest thing I can, because no matter what, I'm going to compete. I'm going to compete against others. I'm going to mostly compete against myself. But that's really why I went into engineering. And so all of this sort of led to eventually a career that I've been doing for 34 years in aerospace at Lockheed Martin. Almost all of the time I've been in Denver. And so all of these sort of things that shape you as sometimes as a young child, what motivates you has really led me to this career. So that's kind of my background. Again, I'm not like a lot of probably folks on the webinar who just knew when they were young they wanted to be into this. I just was looking for something very challenging, something that I could do personally that was competitive. And long story short, I've been doing it for 34 and a half years. I absolutely love what I do. And again, this is the message to all of you. Do something you love. The passion is there every day, the competitiveness. We as an entire world are trying to do the hardest things that mankind has ever done. And so I'm hoping that that's the reason you're doing this. Again, I think all of you are probably way ahead of where I was when I was your age, but that's really what led me to where I'm at today. I have been married for 28 years. I do have two children, two girls. One is out of college and doing well, working full time, which is awesome. Totally off the dole, totally off of my paycheck. And then I have one that's a senior in college as well. So I've been really pleased and proud of them and how they're doing. But that's a little bit of my personal background. So I think the next thing I'm going to go ahead and have you share the chart, the first chart, and I've got 3 or 4 charts in this deck total, and I'm just going to kind of walk everybody through, now that you've heard my personal background, what some of the things are that I've done over those 34 years. And I kind of like to break my career into 3 pieces. It's much more complicated than that. But the very first one that you see here on this chart, I've spent a number of years working at Lockheed Martin on what I would say is almost every planetary robotic spacecraft that has ever visited a heavenly body in the solar system. And you can take a look at this chart. It's really amazing. We like to call it the Swoosh Chart. And if you start off on the very lower right-hand side, when I was 13 years old about Viking, what I didn't know at the time is Martin Marietta, which is now Lockheed Martin, was working with the Jet Propulsion Lab and NASA, and was the prime contractor on Viking 1 and 2. And so even way back when I was 13 and I had that excitement, I didn't realize that eventually the company that I would go to work for and have my entire career for did that job. And so you can see Viking 1 and 2 there. It went and landed 2 vehicles the first time ever on Mars. And as you kind of move to the left on the low side, swoosh up to the right, there's over 24 of these. And I don't want to hit all of them because I don't have that much time. But if you represent the planets that we have visited with this montage, it's literally every planet in the solar system, plus the sun, plus comets, plus solar wind, plus the Hubble telescope. It's really, this is the science textbook, the vehicles that have enabled the science textbook of what we know today. And it's just been really amazing. I mean, I'd like to hit a couple that I actually worked on myself. If you look at Stardust and Genesis and Odyssey, they're sort of in the middle. I actually worked on those missions, as well as a couple that were called Mars Climate Orbiter and Mars Polar Lander. They're actually not on this chart because they were 2 that did not succeed. All of these here were successes. And so really the message on all of these is, how do we as a species go learn more, where we came from, what's the origin of life, are we alone in the universe? All of those questions are what these robotic probes have answered. So working, Stardust and Genesis, returning samples of a comet, returning samples of the solar wind to Earth. I worked on the Mars Reconnaissance Orbiter. There is the one that is on the lower left-hand side in 2005. I was the avionics manager, produced all the electronics, all of the radios, all of the antennas, all of the computers. MRO was a major upgrade in technology as we flew to Mars. It is still in orbit to this day. That has been an amazingly successful program. So MRO in the lower left-hand side I worked on. You see the Phoenix lander, you see Juno, you see Grail. All of these various programs I was personally a part of. A couple there that says Mars Aeroshells, actually the Mars, the Spirit and Opportunity landers, I spent a number of years on. I was the program manager for Lockheed on those. Those were absolutely amazing. They were designed to only last 90 days on Mars. And I believe Opportunity is still alive 13, 14 years later. And that's just amazing. And so I'm not going to be able to spend all the time I would like on all of these and what the purpose of the science is. But you can see really going back to Viking all the way through today, where you see some of the ones that are in gold. Mars 2020 is planning to launch later this month. That's the next in the series of rovers that NASA, JPL, and Lockheed are building. And then there's just a whole nother series of Lucy is another Mars spacecraft, and then Janus and Dragonfly are the two New Frontiers missions that we're working on. So you can kind of see all of these are robotic probes. There's no humans on these, but this is the precursor. You can kind of say these are the scouts. These are, when back in the days, explorers went and crossed the seas and they discovered new lands. That's what these robotic probes are in the year 2020. We send these out, they do science, they do exploration, we learn how to land, we learn how to fly, we learn about the environment, and we can do it without humans on board, and which will help us as we do human exploration. So that's kind of the first third of my career, really spent on what I'll say deep space exploration robotic probes. If you go ahead and go to the next chart, we'll go ahead and I'm going to talk a little bit about Orion and the multi-purpose crew vehicle. And so what you see here is a picture of the Orion spacecraft. We've actually had this in development since about 2008 here at Lockheed. We flew the first test flight back in late 2014. The next Artemis 1 flight will be next year, and then Artemis 2, which will be in 2022, will launch humans further than humans have ever been in history. They're going to go around the moon on a 14-day mission. All of this is going to be in preparation for getting humans back to the moon. And so as I kind of started the talk where we were inspired, or I was inspired back over 50 years ago when we first had humans land on the moon, what I'm about to say here is we are going to return, and we're going to return in 2024, the first woman ever to the surface. We like to say that that's the next really major step in mankind's history. And this is not going to be just a one and done program, but we're also going to be setting sustainable missions that are going to be in lunar orbit. And then that's really going to be the kickoff point to go to Mars eventually in the future. So I was able, fortunately, to spend 8 years working on the Orion program. You can see the crew module kind of on the front end of the stack there, the service module on the back end. Other thing I want to say is this is really an international program. The European Space Agency and multiple nations in Europe are providing the service module, which is the propulsion system essentially for the Orion spacecraft. And then we have been working with NASA for a number of years in getting the crew module where the crew will be there on the front end of the section. So Orion, there are actually 3 vehicles right now down at Kennedy Space Center in Florida in the United States. And we're getting ready to launch Artemis 1 late next year, and then quickly following with Artemis 2 and the first crew to return to the moon and actually fly beyond the moon in 2022. So go ahead and go to the next page. I'm going to quickly show a couple of other programs now that I'm working on. About a year and a half ago, I was actually asked to come off of the Orion program and head up the Lockheed Martin activities associated with the human lander system. And you can actually see a picture of the entire system here. We actually, in figuring out some of the requirements that NASA is looking for, we ended up creating a national team. We actually call it the national team. We're teamed with Blue Origin and Northrop Grumman and Draper on what we're calling the national team for the human lander system. And what you see here on the, on the screen is really, we're building a human lander system in 3 elements. Of course, the Orion spacecraft, which you saw before, will carry the crew from Earth up into lunar orbit. And what you see here are the elements associated with HLS. There is an ascent stage that you see on the right-hand side. That's the part that Lockheed Martin is building. You can kind of think of it as an Orion that's shrunk down, that will descend to the lunar surface and then be able to launch off the lunar surface and then dock to Orion or the Gateway. And so you see that kind of on the right-hand side. And then the other 2 elements, the actual lander itself that Blue Origin is building, they're in the middle. And then on the left-hand side, that is actually the transfer element that Northrop Grumman is building. We need a fairly good propulsion system in order to move the stack from a lunar orbit down into low lunar orbit, and then, of course, go do the descent and landing with the actual lander vehicle. So this is a really exciting time. NASA has actually selected 3 different competitors for this, and we're right in the middle of that competition now, and hopefully early next year, they will make a selection, and then in 2024, along with Orion, we will launch a crew from Earth, made up with the stack that you see, and then take crew down to the surface of the moon. And again, having the goal of the first woman to land on the surface about 55 years after Neil Armstrong did it. And so go ahead, next chart. I'm going to show one more rendition, and this is my actual and my final chart. I think this is a really spectacular vision. All of you, I hope, just take a look at this and absorb this a little bit. This is going to happen not just in your career, but it is going to happen in my career. We are going to see the first woman on the moon in 2024, and you can see the stack there that's on the lunar surface. And we are returning to the moon, not just one time, but to stay. And this is going to really set the stage for all of you, for all of your careers. How far we go in your career is, that's all going to be up to us and how we do this. But the vision is we now have the tools between all of the planetary robotic work that has been done, that are really the scouts. We have the Orion spacecraft, we have the Space Launch System, and now we have the Human Lander System, all there to get us back to the lunar surface. And I'll just be frank, a lot more to come. And so I'm going to go ahead and wrap up so we can take questions. But really, in conclusion, I want to just summarize once again, and I hope this is the takeaway that you've got. I know this went really fast. Is really your career and your life are journeys of exploration, just like space exploration, just like what I've shared, the dozens of missions that we've done that are scientific, robotic, the Orion vehicle, the lunar lander. This is kind of like your career, right? It's like, well, we're building multiple pieces one at a time, multiple elements. And in your career and your life, that's what you're doing. That's what you're doing with your education. That's what you're doing with your jobs, your job experiences, your personal experiences. They're building blocks, and it's really a journey for you. So again, kind of relate that back to your career. And again, for your careers, now is the time for deep space human exploration. There has never been a time in history of mankind that we need this more as a species. We need it not only for our individual nations, but also for our whole world to come together. And frankly, it's up to all of us to make this happen. The Space Generation United group that I'm talking to, it's up to all of you. It's up to us to make this happen. And this is really the future that you're going to be looking at in your careers. So with that, I think I'm done talking, and I'll be able to take questions.
All right. Thank you so much, Paul. That was great. It was so inspiring and exciting to hear about the future plans. We'll go ahead and start with the Q&A session. So our first question from Juan Pablo Teleria. Why do you think the moon mission stopped? Was the Apollo mission way ahead of its time? And finally, do you see any economic benefit from going back to the moon or Mars?
That's a great question. I appreciate it. I'll take it in a bite piece. Why did Apollo end, and why has it been so many years? I think I'll take that first, and then answer the economic one. If you think about the world political situation back in the 1960s, there was an incredible motivation at the time in the United States to basically, quote, beat the rest of the world to the surface of the moon. This was an absolute, I will say, it was the battle of capitalism in the United States against the Russians, who were trying to beat us to the moon. Very, very, somewhat very politically motivated to do that. And so that's a great motivator. In fact, it captivated the entire nation, the entire United States. There were, at one point in time, 450,000 people working on the Apollo program, to give you scope of that. Nearly 500,000 people between NASA, all of the contractors across the United States working on the Apollo program. It was a massive investment on part of the nation to do this. And frankly, it was all about, the geopolitical climate at the time, which was really in the height of the Cold War, was to win that destiny. And, the fact that we landed successfully in 1969, did it, I think, 5 times. Eventually that becomes, okay, you won that one. And the good news is that a goal was accomplished, but it really wasn't sustainable. The goal was really to get boots on the ground on the moon and not have, I'll just say, a sustainable infrastructure long term. And so when politics changed after the success of Apollo, the United States went to more of a, I'll say, focus on low Earth orbit, with building the space shuttle and then building the International Space Station after that. Frankly, the resources and the need just have not been there since then. And what I see today is a complete change back to a need to go to the moon and Mars and beyond, but really for a different reason. And I think I'll touch on that a little bit. I really think the reason now we need to do this as a species is, first of all, it's always built into our DNA to do this. But as a world, we really need this goal to unite us. We need a way to come together as a species, as all nations can. If you look at the International Space Station, my boss is the former head of the International Space Station at NASA. He likes to say that literally that program has probably done more for uniting the world in nations than all of the military money spent. You were able to do it through a peaceful means. I really believe that, going back to the moon in the 2020s, this is going to be sustainable. We're going to do it more than once. This is going to be long-term vision. So there just wasn't the political sustainability at the time to continue that, and the money. But I see that changing as we go into the 2020s. And I think the second part was the economic question, which, I could do entire talks about the value of a dollar. I always like a quote from one of my astronaut friends who said, what's really interesting is there has never been a single dollar in the history of the space program spent in space. It's all been spent on Earth. And so think about that, the economies and the leverage from the Apollo program. If I just go back to that, they said for every dollar that was spent on that program, the gross domestic product in the United States increased tenfold. And so nations around the world are learning this. In fact, you're seeing emerging markets really all over the world. Some of you may be from some of those countries, nations you may not think of, that are now actively pursuing really bold goals. India has just attempted a moon landing. Nations all over the world are doing this that hadn't previously done this. Really, the reason it's not just national prestige, it is economy. Nations are learning that when their companies or when their countries invest in space, it creates jobs, it creates new economies. It's just been proven over and over again that nations who explore, nations who succeed in space are economically very powerful. So they are one and the same. You can argue whether it's 10 to 1, or 5 to 1, but the money that is spent in space, again, is not spent in space, it's spent on Earth. So hopefully that helped.
All right, thank you. Our next question is from Bryce Blackwell. And he says, how does Lockheed collaborate with Blue Origin and Northrop Grumman to determine requirements, standards, mass budgets, etc.?
Wow, that's a really insightful one. In fact, that's what I am living day to day. I thought that's really good. Yeah, anytime that there is collaboration, I kind of talked it in broad terms about how the quote world needs to come together to do these bold initiatives. Not one country can do it, not one company, not one government agency. What I am working on as part of we call the national team on the human lander is definitely a microcosm of that. You've got Blue Origin, which is a new company. It's not that new, by the way. Actually, Jeff Bezos started the company about 15 years ago. He invests significant amount of his resources and has in that startup company. We, of course, Lockheed Martin are one of the quote largest aerospace company actually in the world. Northrop Grumman is similar. When we looked at this just a little bit over a year ago, again, back to the theme that I just talked about, doing something as bold as going to the moon is requiring a broad group of participants. And with 3 companies that have this much diversity, with a startup, with commercial, new ways of doing things, with a company like Lockheed, who again, look at the mural that I just showed, has been literally visited every planet over the last 30 or 40 years. Northrop Grumman built the lunar lander back in the Apollo days. That's really what forced it. Is we realized we had to come together as a team in order to do this. Blue Origin is the prime, and so in the case of any contract that you would have with, in our case, NASA, Blue is the prime. They get the requirements directly from NASA, and of course flow them down to Lockheed and Northrop Grumman. But frankly, we work this together in a very, very badgeless environment. In fact, the systems engineering team, there was a specific question there on mass. It's comprised of members of all 3 teams. We work in a badgeless environment. That can be that has its challenges as well as its benefits. But in general, the goal that we are doing, trying to land on the moon, it is amazing what barriers get broken down between companies when that is your goal. So we work it as a badgeless team. Blue is the prime, and then Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin are the subcontractors. But together, all of us are producing the system.
All right, thank you. So we have the next question from Charlie Gamblin. What piece of advice do you wish someone had given you when you were just starting out in your career and applying for positions in the space industry?
Yeah. Boy, what piece of advice. It was interesting, and I think I sort of alluded to it, but as I was coming out of college, I didn't even have somebody that said, hey, aerospace or the space industry is a great place to go. I mean, that is, very, very, very basic. So I'm hoping all of you have already taken that away. As I've gotten into my career, I think a piece of advice would be try many, many different things. If you're an electrical engineer or you're a mechanical engineer, if you're in finance, no matter what your expertise is, broaden yourself as much as you can. You're always probably going to have an area of expertise. Maybe you're an aerospace engineer and you like doing trajectory analysis. That's great, but you really need to learn finance. You really need to learn. Your how your governments work, how they fund things. Learn things beyond just the technical nuts and bolts of what your expertise is, because frankly, to go to the moon, it's not about just engineering. It's about how do we work together as nations? There's social aspects to it. There are financial aspects to it. There are political aspects to it. And so I'm hoping I'm kind of painting the picture. It took me a while, I think, in my career to really learn, those finance people, they don't just count the beans and tell me to quit spending. They have a real value in the company and how we do activities. And again, broaden yourself as much as you can, get experiences in different functions and different areas. If you're an engineer, that's great. Broaden your engineering background, but also, learn more about how the business works. If you're in a company, if you're going to work for a government agency, learn how contractors work. In fact, that's one of the advice I would give if, folks, there are a number of folks, maybe they're planning to go to work for ESA or NASA or whatever. Maybe you do a stint for 3 or 4 years at a contractor, or vice versa. If you're working for a defense contractor or a space contract, maybe you go to work for NASA at some point. And so broaden your perspective, because there's a lot of perspectives out there. And in order to pull together something as ambitious as going to the moon, going to Mars, it requires all of us to have, more than just one area of expertise. So broaden yourself as much as possible and continue to learn. I'm 34 and a half years into this. I always say every day I'm here, I learn more and more, and I realize that I know less and less.
All right, so we have a question from the live stream from Yukta Sharma. Why did it take 55 years for us to put the first woman on the moon?
Well, first of all, I think I'll answer the question in a really simple manner. It is because it is extremely hard. I mean, landing a human, man or woman, on another heavenly body is arguably the most challenging technical task and geopolitical task that mankind has ever achieved. And so, again, if I kind of went back to the saying, there was a great motivation of national pride, really the Cold War, that led to the success back in the 60s. Why has it taken 55 years? It's because there hasn't been a forcing function until today to really make that happen. And I'd just like to say, this is rocket science, right? This is as hard as it gets. Any one company or one agency or one group that thinks, oh, I can just go do this myself, doesn't understand how challenging the problem is. So I just think that it's really interesting. Maybe there was an aspect of female astronaut. This is how much even the United States has changed since the 60s. Nobody would have ever fathomed having a, quote, woman land on the moon in the 60s. And of course, today, I think 40% of our new grads are female. And so there's been an entire shift from not just demographics in the workplace, but really how society has changed since the 60s. So really two aspects. Number one, it's unbelievably hard to do. And number two, the shift of how society has changed and matured into the 2020s has aligned the opportunity in here in the next couple of years.
All right. So we have our next question from Tafaja Banga. How is Africa and other developing nations going to benefit from these amazing initiatives?
Yeah.
Or do you think it's going to end up?
A really great question. I have actually, I don't have a lot of detail on this, but I do know that what's really interesting is just from a pure, I'll say, motivation perspective, when you look at the accomplishment that will occur, I'm just going to say will occur, when we land human on the moon in 2024 or close to it. Again, this is going to excite the entire world. There is no corner of the world that, in fact, there is an image, is very, very interesting, of Bruce Mccandless. He's a former astronaut. He flew the manned maneuvering unit. And it's one of the most famous images in the world. They actually had done studies of showing, folks, who maybe aren't technology connected in the depths of every nation on Earth. They show that image, and it is recognized by literally everyone on Earth. And so, whether it is direct work that folks do on the program or inspiring nations, again, as developing nations become more and more involved economically. For example, I know the UAE, they have a very, very strong space program. They are doing this not just for national pride, they are doing this for economics. And so all nations, again, have the opportunity to benefit from this. And as technology is available and communication is available, we're going to see more and more emerging nations participate in this. So I can't specifically answer the question, but again, this is a worldwide endeavor. And again, helping unite the world into a common goal is perhaps the greatest single goal of space exploration.
All right, so what is the biggest challenge that Lockheed had to face during development of the landing system?
I was going to say we have developed a number of landers to date that have successfully landed on Mars, from Viking to the Phoenix lander, I think in 2007, the InSight lander that occurred about 3 years ago. I think that I'll tell you, landing on another heavenly body, especially Mars, is an incredibly hard problem. When we do these scientific robotic missions, we do it directly. In other words, we fly, a 9-month journey from Earth. We go direct into Mars and then have to basically take a vehicle that's going 25,000 miles an hour down to 5 or 10 miles an hour in a very, very quick period of time with basically no atmosphere. So technically, the challenge of landing on Mars are many. Navigation is an extreme challenge. We actually lost the Mars Climate Orbiter spacecraft back in the 90s. It was an orbiter because of a navigation error. Navigation is a challenge, but figuring out what the Mars atmosphere is. A lot of people say, well, it has just enough atmosphere to be super annoying. It doesn't have enough to really help, but it doesn't have none where what you're getting into. So being able to what we call aerobrake, in other words, when we fly one of these vehicles into the Martian orbit, we have a heat shield and a back shell that has got to absorb the heat as we go into, and understanding what the atmosphere of Mars is. It's hard enough to do that on Earth when we really understand the atmosphere of Earth. When you're doing it on another planet and you barely have any knowledge of their atmosphere, designing those systems, designing the back shell and heat shield for Martian vehicles and landers, that is extremely challenging. And we've been very, very successful in it. There's actually been a number of different ways now that we've landed. The classic, 3 legs that come out and land, that was Phoenix, and that was InSight. If you look at what Spirit and Opportunity did, the rovers, both incredibly successful, used an airbag system, originally developed by the Russians. I don't know if folks know that, but that technology has been around. It's just, they literally have giant bouncy balls and hit the surface fairly hard, and they bounce and roll for like a kilometer. And so that's another technique that we've used successfully to land on Mars. And then most recently, both with the 2020 mission that's about to fly, plus the last rover that JPL landed, they use a thing called an aero crane. And so the vehicle gets within about 50 feet or so of the surface, and we actually lower the rover on a crane vehicle and then fly the back shell away. So it takes a lot of mechanical engineering. All of this has to be done, of course, autonomously. There's nobody steering it. It's all done with flight computers and software and guidance and navigation control, propulsion. Just the autonomy in order to land on another heavenly body is pretty astounding. And so I would say the challenges are many, the uncertainties are many, and every time it is done, sometimes I think we may almost make it look easy, but it is really, really difficult to land on another body.
All right, we have a question from Florian Marmus. How did you change your ways of working in the wake of the new space evolution and the new actors shaking the space market?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think the reality is some people like to, what do they say, brand it as new space and old space. I like to say we're all space. The techniques and approaches that we have used for years, and especially on the planetary robotic missions that I showed, these are small programs. Lockheed Martin's a very big company, for example. We have well over 100,000 employees, worldwide. But the programs that you saw earlier, all the way from, the, Magellan, all the way to the planetary, they're very small programs. They're 100 people, 200 people, a few hundred people that are doing these. And so building small teams, doing it effectively, and having what I say goals like, planetary windows don't move. When you design one of these programs and you go to Mars, you have about 3 weeks, and in rough terms, 3 to 4 weeks of a launch window. And if you miss that, you're not flying. You're going to wait 2.5 years, if you're lucky, to try this again. And so I would actually say kind of the other way. We have been involved in a whole number of programs over the years, including many that are, I would call them, very, very lean, very, very forward thinking. And as we get together with the Blue Origins, what has been really remarkable, and this has been just fantastic, is how well the cultures actually align. This isn't like, oh gosh, you got one guy that's a snail, the other guy's a rabbit, and the cultures are remarkably similar. And there are business differences. There are obviously differences when you're a very, very large publicly held company with shareholders, traded on stock exchanges, that versus private. And so that's really where we're leveraging the difference, is the business models versus the technical expertise and talent is literally equal across the board and just fantastic. So just some of the business models and how a pure commercial company can do business in some cases more rapidly than a publicly held company, but there are advantages and disadvantages of both. We found that the combination of the two is really optimum.
All right, we have a question from Natalie. Is there any way to involve universities or academic institutions at the international level so that they can participate in the development of these projects?
Yeah, and it's a broad question. I think the answer is throughout again, I'll start with some of the planetary robotic missions. In many cases, these are actually led by universities. If folks don't know that, they're science principal investigator led. In the case of, I don't want to use all the examples because I'll leave somebody out, but in a lot of cases, universities are actually leading the science missions. As far as the human exploration is concerned, we're actually teamed with a number of universities right now on HLS in certain areas of technology development, things like dust mitigation, things that are obviously, as we do things like in situ ISRU activities on the moon, getting water extracted, that's going to be critical at some point to actually refuel vehicles. The research that universities are really doing around the world are leading edge. That's how it always works. Universities tend to be ahead from developing or leading technology development that we as industry then pick up. And so, without going into too many specifics, there are collaborations and work efforts literally associated with every element of the Artemis program that we use throughout the world. So, and space station may be another example. Again, I believe 23 nations were involved in the building and acquiring of space station, and literally took people from all over the world. That model is what I see going forward with Artemis as we do more and more on the surface of the moon, do more and more in lunar orbit, and then really prepare for the ultimate challenge. It'll be transitioning to Mars. So again, it's going to take the entire world, universities, industry, and governments to pull this off.
All right, one more question from the live stream. Is COVID having any impacts on the supply chain for building the landing system and more? And how resilient is the space industry to the times we're living in now?
I love the COVID question, because if you would have asked me back, in February or early March, hey, we're going to have this worldwide pandemic. We're going to shut down. Nobody can come into work. And we're all going to telecommute. We're going to do this thing called Zoom that I guess we're doing right now. I would have said, oh, it'll take years for us to ever, figure out how to do this. And yet I think the COVID pandemic, as tragic as it is, it also shows how resilient and quick to adapt humankind is. We're doing a conference across the world right now I'm doing it from my office. People are at their homes, people are in other countries. I never would have thought that it was possible. And so from a, more specific on the human lander, it's been amazing how fast we've adapted. We here at Lockheed are actually allowed to come back to work now, at least part-time. The folks at Blue Origin are not. They are still all working remote from their homes. The program manager is actually in Florida in his home. And, so from our ability to work as a team, I don't want to say we haven't missed a beat, but it's almost been remarkable how well we've been able to work this together. Where the challenges do come, in this, again, we're not facing this yet at this point on the human lander system, but when you actually get into physical hardware builds, that is a little bit downstream from today, so we're not being impacted at all right now by that. We here at Lockheed, all of our production facilities are open. For example, Orion, I talked about Artemis 1, Artemis 2. From the very first day of COVID, we have never shut down those facilities. We obviously take precautions, social distancing, masks, cleaning, extra cleanings, all of that, but frankly, we have not missed a beat. But I think, again, the silver lining in this has been the amazing adaptability that every employee and person, and I'll say we've created a culture change that has been remarkable. And it is, it's totally acceptable for folks to be working remotely. We've figured out the tools to do this. And again, I think this sort of a conference that we're doing right now is a great example.
All right, I think we have time for one more question. So how realistic do you think a sustainable future on the moon is? So far, we have some sense that there's water ice on the moon, but we're not sure if its state or exact location. So that's somewhat sets us back in terms of habitation or sustained presence. So what are your thoughts on a timeline?
Yeah, I again, being the very bullish person that I am, it's not a matter of doing it, it's a matter maybe of the timing of doing this, but this will happen. I'd like to go back and, again, another lesson for all of you, be history buffs. I've had several bosses that were just absolute history experts, leading back to the history of humanity. And, who would have thought, 500-600 years ago, we would have had an entire new world. You'd have the spread of technology the way it is. Nobody would have imagined it. I think we're on the cusp and believe we've started already on what that sustainability is going to be. There are going to be technology challenges. Obviously, you mentioned, the key to all of this is, water resources, water ice. We've discovered massive quantities, through some of the exploration science missions that I described before of water ice at the South Pole of the moon. It's now just a matter of an engineering problem to be able to discover that, extract it, break it into hydrogen and oxygen, which is essentially rocket fuel. So there isn't a law of physics problem to solve here. It is an engineering problem. It is a socioeconomic problem for the Earth. But again, just because our humanity, going back to our entire history, has always been about exploring. We cannot take that DNA out of our species. The next natural step, both because of our curiosity and our economics and our world situation, is to get a sustainable presence around the moon, on the moon, and then eventually onto Mars. So again, I don't know if I want to predict exact timelines of that, but since all of you are early careers, I will just about guarantee you will spend a significant part of your careers, assuming you go into a space business, pursuing this challenge.
All right. Thank you again so much, Paul, for taking the time. And let's have a virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you again to Lockheed.
I hear the cheering from Vienna.
Yes. Thank you so much again. And yeah, I guess this concludes our keynote.
Thank you so much. Everybody enjoy your conference.